So in the last section, we asked what makes youth ministry worth doing. We decided that it was because of the stage of life that youth are in and the unique challenges and opportunities that they're facing, that it creates opportunities for articulations of the gospel and for practicing Christian ways of life. And then we talked about how our society is really bad at understanding what adulthood is, and we sort of deconstructed the absurd American myth for how you stop being a child and start becoming an adult. So in this section, we're going to demythologize adulthood. We're going to talk about some fundamental characteristics of adulthood as opposed to childhood that would be useful to us to frame a new vision for youth ministry that hits at the heart of what youth are actually going through, what they're actually experiencing, and gives avenues for meaningful presentations of the gospel that fit the challenges and opportunities that are in front of them. When you're looking for an expression of what adulthood actually is in the context of all the confusion that we face, you want a couple of different characteristics for that definition. First, you want to have a definition of adulthood that's both universal and useful. You want to say something about adulthood that would fit at other moments in history and in other cultural contexts than American culture. Because if you're saying something that's just true for America, you can be pretty sure, America right now, you can be pretty sure that that's not adulthood you're talking about because they had adulthood before we were around. I don't know if you heard, but they did. So we want a definition that's fairly universal as we can manage. But we also want a definition that is not vague or broad or abstract, not so vague, broad, or abstract that you can't do something with it, that you can't take it and transform the way that you're doing ministry or interacting with the youth around you. So we want something that's universal, and we also want something that's useful, that's specific enough to be useful. Second, when we're talking about adulthood, we need a definition that makes sense in two different contexts. Adulthood always has a social, an external social component, and it always has an internal component as well, a developmental component. So when you're talking about adulthood, you're talking about two different things at the exact same time. An internal state of maturity that people can arrive at, where their insides look like adults' insides look, and a social state of adulthood, where you can operate in society with the privileges and responsibilities of adulthood, where the people around you recognize that you're an adult and treat you like one, and where you behave like one in respect to the other adults. Now, the reason it's important to distinguish these is because they develop at different rates for everyone. Some people have a much easier job acting like an adult in the world and getting other people to treat them like an adult than becoming mature. Other people have a much harder time acting like an adult and getting people to treat them like an adult than they do becoming fundamentally mature. They're the sort of people that society misses, but we should actually be listening to. So these things operate at different speeds, but when you're talking about adulthood, you're still talking about both of them. And so any definition of adulthood that's worth its salt should be able to be applied in a social context and in an internal context. So we want something that's universal and useful, and we want something that's social or external and also internal and developmental. So, surprise, we've come up with one at CHI, at the Christian Adulthood Initiative. And I want to share it with you. There are three abstract characteristics that we focus on and three concrete themes that we focus on as we describe what distinguishes adults from children. And these are that adults have a fundamentally different relationship to liberty, authority, and identity than children do. And that adults have a fundamentally different relationship to romance, grief, and mystery than children do. So when you're talking about adulthood, you're talking about someone who has crossed a line in relationship to these 6 things and has a fundamentally different relationship to them than they had before. So let's talk through these. Liberty. What do we mean by liberty? When you're a child, it is appropriate for you to not just be able to determine all of your behaviors according to your own will. If the adults in a child's life allow a child to, by their own impulses and by their own willings, determine the course of their own actions, those parents are meaningfully, or those adults around them are meaningfully neglectful. A child's impulses, a child's will, are not developed or reliable enough to ensure their flourishing. We talk about spoiled kids, sometimes appropriately or inappropriately, but when we're talking about it appropriately, we mean kids whose will is not being formed by the adults around them, and who have jurisdiction over their own behavior before they should, and who act in terms of liberty like adults before they have the capacity to do it responsibly. Adults, on the other hand, within the context of social contracts, are able to do as they see fit, and then are expected to take responsibility for what comes of their actions. And this aspect of responsibility tied to liberty is important in respect to children too. If a child does something and some bad stuff happens that they didn't expect, you don't hold them responsible for those unintended consequences in the same way that you would hold an adult responsible. If an adult does something and there's unintended consequences, it still comes back to them. This is true with good consequences and bad consequences. If an adult does something and awesome stuff happens, we all applaud the adult, whether or not they knew what they were doing in the first place. If a child does, we often congratulate their parents or the people around them who have helped them. At some point, you stop congratulating the adults in a child's life and start congratulating the person who did it, whether or not it directly proceeds from their intention. So children have a different relationship to liberty than adults do. And leaving behind a childhood identity and entering into an adult identity means shifting from having a mediated, adult-defined relationship to your own will and to the behaviors that would follow from it, to being someone who has the ability within the context of social contracts to act as they see fit and to have the results credited back to them. That's a big change. That's a big fundamental change. How do you help someone whose will is unreliable to produce behavior toward flourishing become someone who has ownership of their behavior? That's a big transition. And that's part of what we're talking about when we're talking about the transition into adulthood. Second, authority. What do I mean by this? Children do not have sort of automatic authority over the things that are entrusted to them. They receive their family culture, they receive their clothing, they receive their food, they receive their toys, they receive the things that are called theirs by delegation from the adults around them. And they might be given meaningful responsibilities. Maybe they have some chores or something like that that they're supposed to do. But it's kind of like they're in training to have real authority over the things or the people that are entrusted to them. You know, if a kid is failing to do their chores or to fulfill their responsibilities, the adults around them, if they're good adults, are going to try to correct that and manage that and help shape their relationship to their own authority in a new way. But at some point, that guiding hand on the authority that a person has departs, and they're expected to be people who exercise wise and appropriate stewardship and authority over the things that are trusted in their care, the things and the people entrusted in their care. Children, when they fail to properly steward the things that are given to them, are kind of treated as like, they might be punished. There's a sort of guilt and innocence situation going on. Adults might be like, nope, don't do that. Say sorry, try again. At some point, though, there isn't anyone to say, bad job, unless you're violating a social contract like, the law. There isn't anyone to say, nope, bad job. But if you meet an adult who's unable to appropriately steward the things that are entrusted to their care, it is appropriate for adults to sort of, think that that's a little shameful. It's embarrassing to run into an adult who doesn't know how to take care of their stuff or the people who have been entrusted to them. That's a big shift to move away from this guilt-innocent situation where you're being trained to be the sort of person who can take care of stuff, to being someone where it's like, we can't stop you, but we're a little embarrassed if you're failing at this. So how do you help someone lay aside this childhood relationship to authority and take up the mantle of authority that adults are expected to have? That's the question for youth ministry. And third, identity. When I'm talking about identity, I'm talking about both responsibility for one's concept of oneself, and also the way that you introduce yourself to the people around you, and the way that you expect other people to receive you. So it's about who do you think you are, how do you regard yourself, but it's also how do you present yourself, and how do you expect to be received? All of that has to do with identity. Children receive their names, their families, their stories, their culture, their language, their context from the adults who are around them, who raise them. At some point, it's radically important for you to figure out whether you continue to agree with the story of yourself that you were given, and whether you agree with the way of offering yourself to the world that you were trained in, and whether you agree with the way that other people have been taught to receive you. This transition is important because when you run into an adult, you expect them to have themselves in hand. This is a good thing. It's a beautiful thing when you encounter someone who seems to have themselves in hand. Now, of course, when you have yourself in hand, you're going to make mistakes with yourself. You're going to mess yourself up in various ways. But part of the point is, adults are expected to be people who take responsibility for their identity in a way that it's not appropriate to expect children to. Again, in all these cases, if you expect a child to be able to account for themselves and present themselves appropriately in a way that's true and beautiful to the people around them, you're not going to get something that actually looks like them. They might start running around as Batman rather than themselves, or Elsa if you're in my house. And to treat someone as a child as if they have the ability to take their identity in hand is inappropriate, neglectful. But then if you encounter an adult and you condescend to them in regards to their ownership of their identity, you're violating something. It's inappropriate. So this is a fundamental difference between children and adults, is this ownership of your identity. And again, it doesn't mean that you're right. It just means you're responsible for it. An adult will continue to grow in self-knowledge and refine the way that they understand themselves and present themselves and allow them to be themselves to be received, because they have meaningful ownership of their own identity. So those are the three abstract characteristics of adulthood that we focus on: liberty, authority, and identity. And the assertion is that youth ministry that matches the season of life that youth are in will be characterized by inviting youth out of a place where they do not directly get to exercise these principles, liberty, authority, and identity, and into a place where they are capable of holding these things on their own. But there's also three concrete themes that children are not expected to engage with directly, appropriately, and that adults are. Romance, grief, and mystery. When I'm talking about romance, I am talking about, rom-coms. I'm talking about falling in love with someone. I'm talking about marriage. I'm talking about all that stuff, yes. But I'm also talking about the sort of spirit of adventure, I'm just going to go out and try this even though I might fail, kind of romantic engagement with the world. Those things are things that are some of the chief joys of adulthood. This desire to reach out to another person and experience them reaching back, or to run out into an unknown place or a dangerous place and forge a better future. This is the stuff of stories and of songs and of movies. This is the fun stuff. But a child who gets exposed to the heat of romance too soon, whether it's sexual or anything else, who gets allowed to just pursue their dreams in a dangerous way, is being neglected or injured, sometimes abused, by the adults around them. Romance is so hot, so awesome, so great, that when it's used inappropriately, can do incredible harm. And children aren't shaped to receive the kind of harm that they can get from the world of romance. They aren't ready to receive those scars. So they should be protected from romance. It should be blocked from them in various ways. Adults should tell them beautiful little stories to help them process it. Give them little tools to make them more capable of being good romantics later on. But they shouldn't be given access to it directly. But by the time you're an adult, if you aren't able to have direct, unmediated access with the life of romance, you're missing something. You're missing out on some of the chief joys of adulthood, and you're also probably injuring yourself and the people around you. So adults have a fundamentally different relationship to romance than children do. In a similar way, adults are expected to have a fundamentally different relationship to grief than children do, to pain and fear and loss. Children, again, need beautiful little stories told to them to help them process the worst pains and suffering of this world, the hardest fears and challenges. When a child is inclined to be afraid, they need the adults to come and comfort them. When an adult is going through incredible pain, or when a child is going through incredible pain, they need the adults to come and assuage it somehow. They need someone to give them a kiss on the spot where it hurts. What does the kiss do? It doesn't heal it. But it helps. It helps a child. But an adult who's still asking for a kiss on the boo-boo, whether from mom and dad or from some corporate entity that they've decided to entrust their happiness to, is a pretty big failure of an adult. Adults are expected to look pain, suffering, fear in the face directly and figure out how to take the next step. And adults who refuse to learn that become dangerous to the people around them and to themselves. So adults have a fundamentally different relationship to grief, to pain, to suffering than children do. A child with too much exposure to it is either being neglected or abused. An adult with no capacity for it is immature and shouldn't be trusted. And finally, mystery. Adults live in a confusing world, and they know it. You know, some of us try to pretend that the world isn't fundamentally radically confusing, but it doesn't take much scratching to find our unease in the place where we find ourselves. Like, the world just is confusing, and our puny little minds are inadequate for the situation we find ourselves in. Please, someone, account for me how the world of politics, war, and justice has arrived where it has in 2024. Anyone? Someone, please account for me why it is you still behave the way that you hate. I don't get it. And none of us do. We're all making our best guesses. Some of us are better than others at it. But there are some things out there that are just mysterious and will always stay mysterious. Not just bad stuff. Some of the most exciting questions that have ever been asked have been being asked and asked and asked and asked for thousands of years. And this is actually a source of one of my most irresponsible proofs for the immortality of the soul. It's that, like, humans really want to know the answers to questions that take at least like 6,000 years to ask, because we know that we've been asking it for about 6,000 years and we still don't know the answer together. So if you like desperately want to know the answer to a 6,000 year question, either you're just being duped and someone's being mean to you, or you were made to ask questions for at least 6,000 years. So guess you got to live for 6,000 years. It's a horrible argument, but I like it. A lot of the joys of life are in this quest to understand truth more purely, to see the world more clearly. And adulthood can be characterized by a lifelong pursuit of a greater and greater understanding of the reality that God has placed us in. And you can see it in the faces of people who are dying. The people who are still asking questions seem alive, even in their dying. It's something worth aiming for. It's something worth desiring. But children, if they're shown too quickly the vast expanse of the confusion of this world, if they're asked too soon to account for the things that you and I can't account for, it will hurt them. Or they will come to conclusions that will hurt them, and that will hurt the people around them. Children need to be meaningfully protected from the worst mysteries and the best mysteries until they're capable of facing them and ready to face them. Flannel graphs are great. You know, I don't want my kids right now learning the whole Abraham and Sarah story, but I really would like them to receive the flannel graph version right now, you know? Children need a world that makes sense to grow up in, to become the people who can face pain and romance well. But adults, if you're not someone who knows how to engage with your own confusion, you shouldn't be being treated like an adult, and on the inside, you aren't really as mature as you should be. So these three concrete themes, romance, grief, and mystery, represent a fundamental difference between how children are expected to engage with the world and how adults are expected to engage with the world. So if you're thinking about what youth ministry is, you need to consider yourself as a youth minister as someone who ministers to people who are not yet ready to directly engage these things, and to help them become people who are ready to directly engage these things. To invite them into the joy of romance, to invite them into the dignity of grief, to invite them into the adventure of mystery, and to give them the tools that they need in order to face them directly without the direct care of the adults in their lives. This is the fundamental opportunity of youth ministry, because it's what it means to move from childhood to adulthood. So, since youth are defined by the transition into adulthood, youth ministry should be defined by the transition into adulthood. And that is what we call Never Stop Growing Up youth ministry. Youth ministry that takes this understanding of adulthood into account and allows it to transform everything that they do, from their teaching to their small groups, to their games, to their schedules, to the kind of counseling that they provide. Taking this understanding of the state in which youth are and turning it into effective ministry, allowing it to inflect the way that we offer the one gospel of Christ, and that we call them into the great practices of the faith. It empowers youth to receive their liberty, their authority, and their identity from Christ. And it shows them that in Christ are all the mysteries of God and the object of all their desires, and a king and a God who has come down and entered the worst of their pains. This is a beautiful, powerful opportunity. And it's what makes youth ministry so exciting to me. So, as we close out this section, I hope you're beginning to get a glimpse of a whole different way of thinking about what we do. A youth ministry that is justified because it understands what youth are, and made beautiful through a sense of purpose that could give us hope for the future. This is Never Stop Growing Up Youth Ministry. And as we move forward into the next section, we'll begin to answer the question, how? How are we going to do this? What does it look like to take these principles and embed them into our teaching, into our small groups, into the way that we care for students? But now, let's quickly pray. Heavenly Father, we are so silly and weak and ignorant. We're tossed around by the winds of our culture. Give us the courage to find our identity in you, to receive our freedom from you, to accept the authority that you would have us have in this world. Draw us deeper into your mysteries. Bring us more beautifully into the joy of your life. And join us, Lord, in our pain, we pray. In your name, amen. All right, that's 2. Questions about the stuff that we've covered so far? Could be about anything. Yeah.
As a teacher with some experience of this.
Yeah. So good. The question is, if you've got a kid who is starting to grapple with these things that adults need to grapple with, and they obviously don't have the resources in order to engage with them directly, what do you do? Good news is the whole second half of this is going to be a how half. But briefly, you need to transition from mediating their access to those things to liberating them to have access. And the way to do that is to change your relationship to them from being a censor, in a good sense, someone who censors the world, who blocks the things that would injure them, and brings in the things, and a curator who brings in the things that would be good for them, into someone who is a companion or a guide, a friend along the way. And then at some point, you'll peel off, and they'll have to keep going. So a lot of what we're going to talk about is, what does it mean to think about ourselves as good, wise guides and companions to youth while they're making the transition from being able to expect us to take care of everything for them, but before we expect them to take care of everything themselves. And it's a messy process, and it should be a messy process. How else are you going to learn? Everything that's worth it is messy. So, any other questions? Yeah. How do you know when a child is ready for romance, grief, and mystery? You will absolutely never have certainty about the answer to that question. You have to take your best guess, and you might mess up. And you have to be ready as an adult to take responsibility for if you mess up. If you bring it in too soon and they start getting injured, you need to be ready to turn to them and apologize and account for yourself and give them a hug and give them a kiss on the place where it hurts. And if you take too long and they're squirming and just like trying to break out of the confines and trying to get to the romance and the stuff that they know is good for them, then you need to account for yourself and not kiss the boo-boo and open the doors that you've left closed for too long so that they can begin to mess up and do well and find their way forward. But the first most important thing to realize is that certainty about this is impossible and you're going to mess up. Like, it is a fact of the world that the people who are most capable of injuring children for the longest are the adults who raise them. Like, talk to any psychologist or therapist. Best parents ever still equal trauma, right? We're going to hurt our kids. They're going to have to figure out how to deal with the mistakes that we make in their lives. That doesn't mean that you should be laissez-faire about it, you know? It matters. Try to hurt them less. Say sorry, you know, all the rest of it. But if you're aiming for a utopian reality where you're capable of perfectly shepherding them into a pristine adult existence that's free from any difficulty or error, you're living in a different universe than the real one. So you're going to mess up. Get ready to take responsibility. You're going to have to apologize for things. Get ready to apologize really well. Yep.
I think I understand like the grief and the mystery pretty well. Those make a lot of sense. But other than like straight up like abuse, like can you unpack the romance aspect a little bit more? Because I think I was kind of trying to think of examples, and the only thing I can think of is like maybe if you allow a student or a child to like follow their dreams and pursue their dreams in a way that's harmful. Like, can you kind of unpack that more?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just that their dreams aren't going to be the kind of dreams that are actually very romantic yet. You know, their imagination hasn't been shaped to actually try the audacious thing. Or they'll like jump to this idea of this crazy thing that they want to do, and they won't be ready to handle the like financial, social danger implications of pursuing it well. And if you just let them go, like what are the things that kids dream of doing?
What about like a lemonade stand? That's like a
I have never met a kid who dreams of a lemonade stand.
But I'm saying like, is that feels like an appropriate like level,
Right.
Like a dream.
Absolutely. So the adults are always the ones who introduce the concept of the lemonade stand.
Yeah.
You will not find a single kid in the history of the universe who sits around pining after the lemonade stand. But the adults recognize some sort of capacity for the kind of adventures that work implies, interacting with people, you know, making good exchanges, you know. It's cool, feels awesome. So an adult will be like, you know what you want, kid? A lemonade stand. And it trains them for the romance that they could pursue later on, for the entrepreneurial activity that they might pursue in their adulthood. So that's a great example, actually. But like most kids dream, my daughter wants to be Elsa, Queen of Arendelle, when she grows up. And if I totally equipped that, like, yeah, great, we're on it. Elsa, Queen of Arendelle, go. Consider yourself a failure if you miss. You know, like, it's absurd. So that's a simple way of talking about it. All right, any other questions?
Just generally speaking, kind of.
Okay, what adults have the authority to invite youth into adulthood? I think all adults have the authority. Some adults shouldn't be trusted with it by other adults, particularly people who are adults on the outside but children on the inside in some significant way. You would hope that they wouldn't be the people who are inviting youth into adulthood because they haven't caught the vision of it themselves. And unfortunately, I think that that's actually one of the hiring filters for many youth pastors. Like the explicit look, the goal is to find someone who can relate to the youth, which ends up turning into someone who's about as immature as they are. And that is so irresponsible. If you want to hire the best youth pastor for youth, you want to find someone who best embodies what adulthood is, who can be a wise guide to them into that place of adulthood. Cricket spitting is totally optional. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think you'd answered it before by being the wise guide. And that can be almost at any age. We've seen much like what you said before, churches, where they bring in somebody who's contemporary and relevant, but just a child inside, and it's a train wreck.
It is. It's a train wreck. I mean, I'm especially grumpy about this because I was in a fun situation when I was a senior in high school. Our former pretty awful youth pastor left, praise God. And the pastor of our church convened the seniors and said, "What are you looking for in a youth pastor?" Which, great, good job, pastor, for doing this. And we seniors said, "We're not ready to answer you right now. Can we think and pray about it together and then have another meeting with you where we talk about it?" And we went all out. There were 5 of us. We had formal meetings. We assigned a secretary. We took notes. It was a little intense. And yes, we were nerds. It's okay. And we came back to our head pastor and we said, "We've figured it out. What we want is a grandparent-aged couple who's been married for at least 30 years to lead us in rigorous Bible studies through the book of Romans, which we don't understand." And our head pastor was like, and then hired a fool. So I'm a little angry about it. And that gives me juice to do what I'm doing now. Anyway, any other questions? All right, let's take a break.